Ready, Ben?
All right. Yep.
And we are live. Hello and welcome to Pursuit of Perfect System and another special guest live stream video. And this one's going to be, I think, very, very interesting because we're going to be discussing and looking at some really interesting topics, I think, for lots of different audio files for lots of different reasons. So if you are joining us live, welcome and thank you very much. And the whole purpose of these videos, these live videos, is for you guys to get involved. So there is a chat section. Get involved in the chat section, ask your questions, and towards the end of the video, we'll be doing the viewers' question section of this particular live stream. So just a quick introduction. I've been spending some very interesting time with some ATC speakers and electronics, and hopefully, if you're watching this video, you've been keeping up with the channel and you've seen some of the videos that I've created for this. So for tonight's special guest live stream, I've invited Ben Lilly from ATC. Ben, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How you doing, Terry?
I'm very, very good. So guys, when you're watching this, just do us a favor, keep an eye on the volumes. Let us know if there's any issues with volumes or anything going on with the video. So Ben, first of all, thank you very much for joining us. I really, really appreciate your time and coming on the video.
My pleasure.
So Ben, obviously you have worked for ATC for what feels like forever in terms of time.
It's gone pretty quickly. Yeah, it's been 17 years now. Yeah, I joined ATC not long after leaving university, and a stint at Acoustics, a consultancy firm based here in the UK. And yeah, started my career with ATC working in research and development in the engineering team alongside our managing director, Billy Woodman. And I now take up a position in between sales and design, looking after support, technical sales, training, and that's on the hi-fi and the professional side of the business.
So really you wear a lot of different hats for ATC. So I think I would assume a lot of people watching this video are familiar with ATC. Obviously they are a British hi-fi manufacturer of electronic speakers and more. But I figured you would probably be the best person to tell us a little bit about ATC as a company and maybe a little bit of the company's history.
Yeah, the company was founded in 1974 by a managing director, Billy Woodman. And primarily at the beginning, the company was making loudspeaker drive units, so just the drive unit components for use in the live sound industry. Billy started his career at Goodman's Loudspeakers, which were a huge British manufacturer back in the 70s. Whilst he was there, he had a couple of ideas for drive units for hi-fi that could also be applied to studio loudspeakers. And at that time, Goodman's were going through some changes and weren't so interested in these ideas, which were really focused on quality and performance rather than the higher volume production route they were going down. And Billy went off on his own and founded ATC to realise these ideas. And then we started in London in the 70s, and then moved to our current home in Gloucestershire in the 80s.
Ben, let's put us both on the screen, mate, for 1 second. There we go. Yeah, because, oh, put that one in the background. There we go. Yeah, because when I was putting this video together, doing the thumbnail, I had to quickly double check my maths because ATC have been going over 45 years. So I've got that correct, haven't I? That's obviously a long time.
Yeah, that's right. We're, not the oldest, British loudspeaker manufacturer, but probably one of the oldest independent British loudspeaker manufacturers still around today. There's many that are still around, but it's only the brand that's around rather than the actual company as it originally was when it was first formed.
So I was going to ask you the question, what makes ATC unique amongst all the different hi-fi brands? But I think that pretty much answers that question in a sense, the manufacturing aspect, isn't it?
Yeah, that side of it. We're independent, independently owned, and we make all of our own components. The majority of them in-house at the single facility near Stroud, and that includes all our loudspeaker drive units, bass drivers, mid-range drivers, the tweeters, all of the crossovers and the active amplification, and also the standalone electronics, the preamplifiers, integrated amplifiers and power amplifiers. We've also got our own cabinet factory. It's not at our location in Stroud, but only about an hour north near Evesham.
So do you think that makes a big difference to ATC's products in terms of, I don't know, design or quality control, all those really important things?
I think on the loudspeaker side of things, yeah, especially so. I mean, when you're designing a loudspeaker, you're really defined by the components you use, the drive units themselves, and being able to start the design process with the drive unit for any given loudspeaker definitely gives you an advantage. It means we're not dipping into the same pot of OEM parts as our competitors are. And maybe not having to make the same compromises. A lot of the issues and the problems and shortcomings are inherent in the drive units themselves, and those problems can't be engineered out with processing further down the line. So the best approach is to start with the best possible component, be it the amplifier, the crossover, and especially the drive unit, and that then simplifies the rest of the system design further down the line.
One of the things that I think stands out to me about ATC as a manufacturer is the fact you make hi-fi components, electronics and speakers, but also studio speakers and electronics, active speakers and such. Do you think one gives you an advantage with the other? Does the studio work benefit the hi-fi designs and vice versa?
Yeah, I think they both help each other. Maybe the pro side helps the hi-fi a little bit more. Definitely the professional users are demanding in terms of reliability. All our products come with a 6-year warranty. And a studio, their day rate is based on the specification of the space, and reputation. And, if they're demanding X number of pounds a day to work at the studio, the stuff's got to work day in, day out. Also dynamic range and the sound pressure level capability. The pro guys can be pretty demanding on how hard they work the equipment. So I think from that, and also the fact that we started out making transducers for the live sound industry, that's definitely helped us in terms of the reliability and the ruggedness of the products, and how long they last. We've got plenty of hi-fi customers out there that have owned their ATCs in excess of 20 years. They come back for service, we repair them, and they go out as close to good as new.
One thing that just sprung to mind, funnily enough, because I'm looking at a Panasonic display at the moment, and they make a thing about from the studio to the home in terms of like films and the grading, the colouring, etc., etc. Does that have any impact? I.e., we hear it in the studio, we know how it should sound at the home. That's like kind of one of those cheesy, corny things that gets thrown around in hi-fi, but I feel like it could be one of those things that there's some merit to it as well.
Yeah, it's useful having a group of trusted audio professionals that we can rely upon if we need testing to be done, who are working day in, day out, listening and judging sound quality. That's their job. So having those guys to support products and help with testing is definitely useful. But in terms of judging the quality of a speaker, yeah, I think being in the studio can be helpful. I think live sounds probably, being at a live concert's one of the most useful things. Knowing what a violin sounds like, playing in the same room as you, or a piano. And we use a lot of acoustic instruments when we're testing for that very reason, and a lot of voice as well. I don't think there's anything that you're more sensitive to rather than the quality of a voice. So if you're ever doing any testing, voice is especially useful for judging the quality of any audio component.
Well, look, in terms of, I suppose, kicking off the main bulk of the live stream, or the bit I want to start by talking about is, I've been spending time with the SCM50 speakers. Obviously, that is them with the P2 power amplifier, and that is kind of how I started my ATC journey. This is the first set of ATC speakers I've ever spent any real time with. So it's been very, very interesting. Let me just take that down. So really, I think what's been, very, very interesting to me is spending time with the passive versions of the SCM50s. Obviously, speaking to you about the differences between passive and active speakers, the technical differences, then getting to spend time with the active side of the SCM50s, doing the conversion myself, seeing the passive crossover, seeing the active components. All that's been, so interesting and educational for me. And none of that would have mattered But when it came time to listen to the active speakers, I was like, wow, I'm actually hearing a lot of the technical explanations that have been sort of explained to me, and it's very rewarding and very informative when you learn something and then you can kind of support that with what you hear. I hope I've explained that obviously correctly.
Yeah, I think so. I think I get what you mean.
So obviously I've learned some, I think, of the basics of why an active speaker is better than a passive speaker from a technical point of view. But what would you say are the main technical reasons why an active speaker can be a better performing speaker than a passive?
Well, a lot of it comes from the elimination of the passive crossover network. So whenever you're designing a passive crossover network, the difficulty is that you're trying to optimize the shape and the frequency in which the filter turns over. You're also trying to optimize the phase or the timing aspect of the crossover, and to make sure that the two drive units not only are playing back at a similar level at the crossover point, but also with a coherent time signature, so they're not out of phase. And also the impedance, because the crossover affects the impedance, the load that the amplifier sees, and these parameters are linked together. There's a little bit of stretch between them, but if you can imagine, the parameters are linked with sort of elastic rather than a rope or a string. Whenever you're trying to modify one parameter to, say, optimize the shape of the crossover, you're always affecting the others. So in many cases, not all, in many cases though, you end up with, at the end of your design process for your passive crossover, you've got 1, 2, or 3 revisions, and then you do your listening test and you settle on the one that you're going to use. But they're not always perfect. Now with the active design, you can have greater flexibility, greater control over those parameters. The amplifier is connected directly to the drive unit, not to the crossover. And if you're manufacturing the amplifier and the drive unit, then you've got direct control out of what the amplifier needs to do in order to drive that speaker correctly. You can add an additional circuit to control the phase aspect of the signal, which you can't do. Well, that's not strictly true. You can do in passive, but it's extremely difficult. And you've got much greater control over the Q, the frequency and the slope of the filters. It's easier and much more cost effective to implement steeper slopes should they be needed.
So one of the things that you sent me some information through, like on a slide. I'm just going to pull the first one up here, which is obviously the description of the passive system, which it was actually looking at this. Yeah, so we've got the power amplifier, and then we've got the passive crossover, which obviously comes after the amplifier. So that's got to see all the amplifier power and current and still do its job. So it's got to do its job of dividing the signal with as least, I assume, power loss as possible. And then it's also got to be very robust, because that amplifier driving that crossover could be 200, 300, 400 watts plus. So the components chosen there need to be selected in terms of their power handling, not necessarily just on their ability to divide the correct frequency with the correct phase relationships. Well, that is when it kind of leads me to this image, which I took from one of the videos, in a sense of obviously the substantialness, I don't know if that's a real word, but the substantial size and quality of that passive crossover blew me away, funnily enough. As I took that out of the speaker, out of the SCM50, I was like, wow, this is big, this is heavy, this is really high quality. And then obviously comparing that to what you do with the active system, which is obviously putting the division of the signal first, obviously with this diagram, which means everything comes after the crossover, means that we can end up with a much smaller overall design, still doing the same thing. That was really difficult to get my head around at first, Ben.
Yeah, I think if we refer back to that picture before as well, one of the key reasons we can get better in performance with the active is that the crossovers are at the beginning here, so the crossovers don't see the drive units. So I think that's probably the best way of putting it. If we flick back now to the passive crossover graphic, that's possible.
This one, yep.
Yeah, so the passive crossovers are loaded by the drive units. Now, that would be all well and good. However, the speaker is a complex device. It does have a nominal impedance, be it 6 ohms, 8 ohms, 4 ohms, whatever it is, but that isn't constant with frequency. And another major problem is that if you put 1 watt into the speaker, the voice core might be at 22, 23, 24 degrees centigrade. But if you put 100 watts into that speaker, it suddenly gets hot, and the device is no longer an 8 ohm device. Suddenly it's a 10 ohm device. And because the crossover is connected to that load, which is now, we're talking about a time and power varying load, the crossover behavior actually changes depending on the drive level. So if we're putting 1 watt into the speaker, it may behave perfectly, exactly as you want. But if we're driving, an average of 10 or 20 watts into the speaker, perhaps with peaks of 100 watts, the speaker gets hot, and then the passive crossover no longer behaves as it was originally intended. Whereas with the active design, the crossovers don't see this varying impedance, so they behave exactly the same regardless of drive level. And that's one reason an active loudspeaker will sound more dynamic, and it'll also sound more consistent over a wide range of listening levels.
That's obviously very, very interesting. I think some of the feedback that's come through for the videos, and something that's in my mind, is that is there any instances where we could use, or where a passive speaker would be better, for example, with a tri-amped system, 3 whacking great big amplifiers, obviously still going through that passive crossover, would that be better than the active speaker version?
You could, if we were taking as an example the active 50 you had for a review, so that's got a 200 watt amplifier on the base. You could have a 600 watt amp powered passive system, and it might sound a little bit more dynamic in some regards. However, it wouldn't fix any of the issues in terms of the accuracy of the filters, the phase response. The improved phase response, the timing aspect of the active means that you get much better stereo imaging, more accurate stereo image, a bigger stereo image. It could improve probably just one aspect of it, really. But not all of it. I think the active system, if you evaluated it across multiple parameters, I think the active system would still be the better performer.
Yeah, because that's something we had a little discussion before we went live. Was what is making the difference? Is it more the amplifier? Is it more the active crossover? And we discussed it was the active crossover that's doing the things that the amplifier just can't do, regardless of what the amplifier is.
Yeah, and effectively the passive crossover sitting between the amplifier and the drive unit. So as you keep improving the amplification, if you could do that almost infinitely, you're still driving that passive crossover network, which doesn't do as good a job as the active network, so you're sort of you wouldn't be getting the best out of the system. Now, if we were to go to a separate crossover and multiple big power amplifiers, then again, maybe we could then make an even better system. But ultimately, a similarly spec'd active and passive system compared, the active is going to have superior performance. For some hi-fi listeners, maybe they might prefer subjectively the sound of the passive. It can be a little less revealing, some of the sharper edges maybe of a lesser recording sort of get smoothed off with the passive system. But most people who audition it, and A/B the two, have the opportunity to compare the two, go for the active system over the passive.
I suppose just to flip the question on its head, are there any significant or noticeable drawbacks to going the active route as opposed to the passive route for a speaker design?
Not really in terms of performance. There's going to be practical issues. If you're into your hi-fi and you've built up a system over a long period of time and it's always been passive, you might have invested heavily in power amplifiers. You own a really nice stereo amplifier, multiple monoblock amplifiers. So if you're in this position, having to totally change the way you do things, trade in those amplifiers, sell those amplifiers, and then go to an active approach, then obviously that's difficult. There's the jewelry aspect as well. I think people like a fancy looking system, and I suppose the active fit. The actives can, with the onboard amplification, maybe a little humble. Less pizzazz than the big stack of monoblocks. So, but those are the only two that immediately spring to mind. If we take out the fact of if we say that any given customer likes the sound of both, then and so that's a sort of a leveler. I would say those are the only two things that really spring to mind.
Because that was kind of half leading on to the question I was going to ask next, actually, is, if the active speakers are better, why do ATC kind of make both active and passive? But I think you've kind of half answered that there, really.
Yeah, I mean, just to cater, we appreciate that in hi-fi, passive is still the most popular way of doing things. People are well invested in amplifiers. They've got products they love, and they've owned for a long period of time, and we don't expect them to just suddenly throw all that out the window, trade it in, and go with an active design. We'd hope that someone with a really nice passive system could appreciate the qualities of the actives, but yeah, we want to be able to offer customers who own power amps really good power amplifiers, by ATC or many other brands out there, the opportunity to use an ATC loudspeaker, and only offering active would get in the way of that. And I don't think that's the right way to do it.
To be honest, Ben, I think it's great giving people choice, giving people flexibility, giving people the options, giving them the choice to choose what they like the best. To me, I think that's fantastic. And if I had a hat on, I would take it off, obviously, to you and ATC for doing that. To me, that's really, really great. One thing that maybe people are thinking about, or maybe confusing maybe with an active speaker system, is that a lot of other active speaker systems out there on the market are kind of digital based or DSP based, where they'll have streamers built in and digital sections. Is there anything digital at all within the ATC active speaker range?
No, they're all analog. So the signal flow is a balanced input, and then you've got a two-way or a three-way analog crossover. In most cases, fourth order, and then 2 or 3 power amplifiers, depending if it's Class A, B power amplifiers, depending on whether it's a two-way or a three-way system. But no, we haven't really gone down the digital path. We make a couple of digital products. We make a CD DAC pre, and we make a CD player. But we haven't got any digital features in our loudspeakers.
Yeah, which, to be honest, actually, again, is a positive to me. That stands out as a great one for me, because it gives you choice and flexibility to use what DAC you want, what streamer you want, what music server you want, what CD player you want. And I feel like DAC design and development is probably very much matured, but things still move forward. And that means that the speaker you buy is never going to become obsolete, because you can change the DAC, you can change the source or the server or the streamer to keep yourself up to date. So that stands out as a positive to me rather than a negative, really.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, digital is sort of maturing, but it's still, some way off the maturity of an analog system. So, and I think we do like the fact that there's, we're still getting these old speakers back. We can still service, and if we were doing digital and the faster pace of the digital technology, I'm not sure we'd be in exactly the same position if we'd, with a digital loudspeaker, if we'd gone down that route. I mean, there are some benefits to digital. You can have much greater control over the timing aspect of the signal. Just like I was saying, there was advantages with the analog crossovers. Again, there are advantages going to a digital crossover system, but there's also the downsides. Possible redundancy, much more complex system as well. And I know based on feedback from our customers, they really appreciate the simplicity of the AT systems. Combined with the sound quality they offer, the reliability, and the fact that they can be serviced and maintained over a long period of time.
Well, I think that actually segues us really nicely to the next thing I wanted to speak to you about, because in the last few videos I keep saying, these are the ATC SCM50, a legendary hi-fi speaker and studio speaker. And then one of the viewers asked the question, well, why are you not telling us about this speaker? And I would like to say that's because I was waiting for this video for you to tell us, Ben, but that would only be a half truth. It's, in my mind, obviously everybody knows about the ATC SCM50, but obviously they don't. So you kindly sent me through a bit of a history about the speaker, which I'll show you here, and a history that dates back to the 1980s. And that really took me by surprise. And I suppose that goes hand in hand with an existing product, a product that's been developed over time, and one that's, I suppose, not obsolete, one that's been developed and around. And as you say, people have owned these for many years and enjoyed them for many years.
Yeah, it goes back a long, long way. I mean, the forebearer to the 50 was a product called the S50. Not many of those around anymore, but that was Billy's first three-way. So it used a 9-inch bass driver, not the super linear part that's in the current drive unit, but a short coil, long gap design for best linearity. Still used the 3-inch mid-range, but the first version, which used a smaller magnet system, and I think it was an Audax tweeter, if my memory serves me right. And that it was very like a wedge shape, so very, very 1970s styling, with a big heavy grille that fitted over the outside of it. And that then evolved into what was the first SCM50, with quite a lot of feedback from a professional client in Denmark. I think it was Danish radio. It's been in continuous production ever since. We update it with new drive unit improvements when we can. So it's a product that's evolved over time, and a great deal of people have come to know and love. And I don't think it'll ever go away. The 50, we don't like to discontinue something and then have a new version come out. I think we'll always make the SCM50. It'll just be constantly updated, and where we can, we try and make the improvements to the product available to existing customers. It's not all, they can't always be straight drop-ins, but where we can, we make the upgrades available so that someone who's invested 10, 15 years ago can get the latest tweeter, for instance, fitted and bring it up to current spec. Amplifiers can be serviced. Should there be a new amplifier, then that would be able to be upgraded as well. So, although there's an initial high purchase price, our products aren't cheap. We don't try to suggest otherwise. The cost of ownership over 20, 25 years, 30 years can actually be quite low.
You know what? That's something that I hadn't really even thought about until I just looked at that then and thought about it. Is I was trying to think of other speakers that offer that. And I'm sure there are some out there. Somebody might be able to mention some in the comment section, but I couldn't think of any off the top of my head that you could upgrade, if that makes sense. A speaker system that you buy that you can upgrade over time. Normally, it's a case of a new model comes out and then you have to buy the new model. So that's again a great thing.
Well, it doesn't always make commercial sense, the upgrade thing, but we've always tried to offer good value for money. These are really expensive products. And if you do invest in them, then we want to look after you, not just for the next couple of years, but for the lifetime of the product. And it's in terms of it being, lots of people talking about green issues and being environmentally friendly. I mean, I don't think there's anything better than that, really, than keeping something going, not throwing it away.
That's a really good
whereas
point,
whereas most modern technology is very much focused on it's got a finite lifespan. What is it? Computer, 6 years, you chuck it in the bin. So that's we don't want to build products that are like that. We want to build products that have got a really long lifespan, and can be fixed and repaired for many years to come.
Well, obviously, the SCM50, and one of the benefits and perks of doing this job is you get to play with really lovely hi-fi toys that are, premium products that cost a premium amount of money. But, I mean, I still don't actually know the ATC other range of speakers that well. So I was looking at the website, looking at the different products and speakers and stuff that you make. And the most affordable hi-fi speaker that you make is the SCM7. I hope I've got that correct. Which retailed
Yeah, that's right, sir.
So that retailed for, I think, £875 when I checked that.
Yeah, 875, that's correct.
So is that speaker still manufactured in-house, or the driver still manufactured in-house? Is that the same as the more expensive premium speakers?
In all of the important technical aspects are manufactured in-house. So the bass driver and the tweeter, they're both made in-house by the same people that make the drive units for the SCM50. The cabinets and crossovers are not made in our own facility, so we buy that, and we only have a narrower range of finish options on this range of speakers. So by only offering 4 finishes and having this range of cabinets produced in volume, we can hit a more competitive price point. But the drive units in the SCM7 are all made in-house and exactly the same production line as the SCM50.
Oh, I wish actually I would have been a little bit more prepared. I could have obviously loaded up an image, but the different ranges on the website were the entry range, the classic range, and the tower range.
That's correct, yeah. So the entry series is the SCM 7, 11, 19, 40, active 19, active 40. And in each case, the number relates to the acoustic volume of the speaker internally. And then above that, you've got the classic and tower, yeah, as you correctly identified.
And funnily enough, this is one of the things that I wasn't sure about, and someone else asked the question again throughout the videos. Is there a sound quality or a physical, obviously it's a physical difference, sorry. Is there a sound quality or a technical difference between the classic range and the tower range?
No, the classic and tower are technically identical, and the cabinet is, the difference is only in the style of the cabinet. So although the tower series, which are a floor stand, those are the classic series, which are a stand mount, although the cabinets appear to be larger, the acoustic volume, the volume seen by the bass driver, is actually the same. So really, it's just a case of picking the style of cabinet that you prefer, the stand mount or the floor stander.
And obviously, in terms of the different speaker ranges, for example, entry and classic, are ATC going for a different type of sound, or are they trying to achieve I'm going to call it an in-house sound, only because it's the easiest way to kind of reference it. But is there a different in-house sound for classic as for entry?
No, not at all. I mean, there's what we do is, and it's actually useful that you've just reviewed the 50. That because the 50 is our longest running product, and it sits pretty much in the middle of the range, halfway up in terms of product size. That's the we consistently refer to when we're doing new product development. So we're always referring back to the SCM 50 when we're designing smaller and larger products, and I suppose that's the way we try and achieve our house sound. We're not trying to do anything different when any of those loudspeakers. Build a speaker that's got neutral fidelity and wide dynamic range, which is going to give the listener a realistic insight into their music collection, or what they're doing in the studio if they're a professional. Of course, there are going to be differences. Trying to get a small two-way to sound just like a three-way, a 50-litre three-way is very, very difficult. But that's the way we work. So that probably gives people an idea of what to expect. So I mean, as you go up the range, people should expect the speakers to be capable of more dynamic range, so more sound pressure level, and an extended low frequency response. But we hope that they'll find there's a fairly consistent ATC sound, timbre, character through the mid and high frequency, regardless of the size of the product.
That is why I wanted to ask that question, is because if someone owns, say for example, the SCM7, and they want confidence of spending more money moving up the ATC range, and they like the sound, obviously they're going to get kind of more of the same. Is probably a good way to describe it, rather than something different. I think that's really important for people to know.
And another thing that helps us do that is by engineering all the drive units in-house. We can apply consistent materials technology, consistent philosophy, consistent methods of assembly across the full product range. Whereas with a product range, the size we have, if we were to source from an OEM supplier, it would be very difficult to find a single source for all those parts, and I think that would make that achieving that consistent character across the full product range very, very difficult.
That's actually a really good point. That's something I hadn't thought of. One thing that does stand out to me, and correct me if I got this wrong, is that the entry range of speakers are sealed, and the classic are then ported. So I suppose, what is the design choice for going that route, and does that have any, again, effect on performance differences?
It's kind of coincidence actually that it's by series. It would be more accurate to say that we choose by type and size. So we only start building the ported designs, or vented designs, if you like, when you get to the bigger three-way loudspeakers. So with a ported design, the port, and the way we use it, the port controls the bass driver motion, and I'm sure you've and many of our listeners have seen a small ported design. When you put low frequency into it, the cone is very prone to flapping around and overextending the travel, and that's because effectively below the port tuning frequency there's no loading on the drive unit. So if you take a small two-way design like the SCM7, if we were to do it, build that as a ported design, port tuning frequency is probably going to be up around 50 hertz. So the port would be effectively controlling the bass driver down to, I don't know, maybe into the high 30s, something like that. But then for the lowest frequencies, there would be very little control of the drive unit. So we've always preferred to use a sealed box for the smaller speakers, to ensure that they get driver control down into the very bottom octave, and then we switch to the ported design for the larger models, where the port tuning can be low enough that you get driver control right down to the bottom octave, down towards 20 hertz.
That makes a lot of sense. So really, it's designed for technical reasons to achieve a certain type of performance within the speaker size and character.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and in theory, the SCM40 could be a ported design, but because the focus of that range of products is on value, we go with the simpler sealed design. And maybe as a happy accident as well, the feedback has been that from many customers, they really appreciate the sealed box designs, because I speak to people every week that have problems sighting the speakers in the room where they've got a balance bass response, and we find that the sealed boxes are much easier to position, and less fussy in terms of the bass sounding unbalanced in most domestic spaces. Probably less of a problem if it was a studio, but when the speakers are often got to be close to the wall, you're going to get some bass gain from the wall anyway. So the sealed box design often works well, and it's rare that you can't find a good spot for them, even in a troublesome room.
I was just about to ask you about that. Does that make it easier for placement in terms of up against walls and in corners and stuff?
Yeah, definitely, because usually for a sort of small to medium-sized ported box, the frequencies that they have got some extra output at, sort of 80, 100 hertz sort of region, is often similar to the sort of frequencies where many domestic spaces have got problems in terms of having a boomy character to the bass. So having a little less output at those frequencies is often a useful thing rather than a problem.
Obviously, for me and probably a lot of audiophiles, ATC are famous for making speakers. We always see ATC speakers and know them for that. But obviously, ATC also manufacture electronics, amplifiers, integrated amplifiers, preamplifiers, as you mentioned, CD players as well. There are a lot of different, electronics or hi-fi electronics manufacturers across the world. What would you say would make ATC stand out as a hi-fi electronics manufacturer?
I think we focus on doing the simple things really well. Focus on producing powerful amplifiers. I know that Billy had a lot of problems when he's starting out with ATC, with your typical hi-fi amplifier in the 70s and 80s wasn't particularly powerful, and you get a lot of clarity from a system from its dynamic range capability. People always think about the clarity of the speaker being because it's got low distortion or some other parameter, but a lot of it comes from having enough dynamic range, enough headroom to reproduce the transient, so that cymbal crash really pops. So that attack on the piano really jumps out of the speaker. And I know we had a lot of problems with underpowered amplifiers in the early days. So I think our amplifiers are a very good value in terms of offering lots of power, in terms of their price point for a handmade UK built product, and wide bandwidth of the amplifiers as well. A lot of manufacturers can restrict the high frequency response of the amplifier, and we found that although your hearing drops off at 20 kilohertz, you can't hear far above that, and for me and you, that's probably more like 15k. Depending on how much.
They're golden ears underneath here, mate. Golden ears.
Depending on how much time we've spent at venues late at night. The high frequency response above the limit of our hearing is really important, because if you want to correctly reproduce complex signals up at the top end of the audio band, then the electronics needs to actually have a frequency response far beyond the range of our hearing. So it's a focus on, there's a couple important parameters. The bandwidth and headroom are very important, which I think sets our electronics apart from many others. The preamplifiers have also got really good current drive capability, so they can drive long cables if they need, and they're totally tolerant of difficult loads. should they be presented with one. And they've got, again, like the speakers, got a very neutral character. Don't embellish, and they just sort of quietly get on with doing the job without making too much fuss.
Well, I think obviously the P2 power amplifier, from a design point of view, it's got that kind of understated elegance about it, but it's also got some quite nice, I'm going to use the word sexy, I know people don't like me using that word, but some nice, attractive is probably a better word, than grills on the top, like a little bit of a touch, like a quality of design touch. It just adds that little bit extra in terms of things, so that was nice.
They're produced using an acid etching process we came across about 8 years ago now. So we take the sheet steel, it's stainless in the case of those components you're talking about, and then one of our suppliers, they print a resistive layer onto it, and you can do it on both sides if needs be, depending on the component in question. And then instead of mechanically milling or cutting away the material, they actually spray it with acid. So then it's actually called chemical milling. So you can then dissolve away selectively different parts of the metal, and you can create very fine detail with this process that isn't possible with a mechanical system, because the mechanical system it's too stressful. Yeah. For instance, those hexagonal vent holes in the top of that mesh, you couldn't leave such a fine piece of metal if you were using a mechanical process in that situation. So it's that's been a really interesting discovery, that manufacturing method.
To me, that's like ATC James Bond manufacturing, Ben. That's pretty cool. That's very, very cool. I would never ever have imagined that. Right, so I want to move us on to some viewers' questions, and I have to have a nice scour through the chat in a second. But obviously, there's been some people asking me questions again throughout this review process, which has been really fun. So one of the ones that really jumped out at me, and I had a conversation with the guy about this, is that he had bought, I'm not going to say the manufacturer, but he bought another manufacturer's active speaker. That was a DSP-based speaker. And the manufacturer warranted, he's telling me this, I haven't checked this myself, but he was saying the manufacturer warranted the speaker for, say, 5 years, but only the electronics inside for 1 year. So he asked me the question, what is the warranty with ATC? And is it the same warranty for the electronics as it is the hardware? I don't know what other word to use, but the speaker drivers and cabinet and stuff.
Yeah, we have a standard warranty of 6 years, and that applies to passive loudspeakers and active loudspeakers, and also includes the electronics. So we don't differentiate between the two in terms of the warranty. So it's 6 years across the board, and there's been a couple of occasions with some special edition products that we've built in the past that we've given original owner lifetime warranty.
Oh wow! One of the other viewers contacted me that they're considering buying the SCM 150, the big boys.
Yeah.
And their question was, they've got a large room and they listen to a lot of classical music. Should they buy the active version of the SCM 150 or the passive version because of the room and because of the music they listen to?
I don't think the room really needs to impact that decision. I mean, first and foremost, if possible, it'd be great if you could have a listen to both. But our recommendation would be to go for the active, because they objectively they outperform the passive speakers. The active crossovers and the multiple power amplifiers just give you that extra performance that the passive speaker can't match. I mean, the only occasion maybe in the past where for a couple of people I might have recommended them go with the passive is that. Yeah, if your record collection was such that you've got a lot of maybe not so polished recordings, so the actives can be a little bit more revealing of a lesser recording, but that would really be the only reason to perhaps consider the passive over the active. In most cases, if people are open to active or passive, they're not tied into a huge investment in power amplifiers, then active's the way to go. If you A/B the passive versus the active 150, I think 8 out of 10 people would pick the active.
Yeah, because when I read the question, I didn't want to give an opinion because I haven't heard the speakers, the 150s, to give one. But I was thinking after hearing the active and passive 50s, the benefit to stereo imaging, the dynamic swings, and the extra resolution and clarity would probably be really nice for classical music. A real benefit for it rather than a negative. So I would have said the active, but Ben. You're the expert, not me. So
No, active's the way to go. Yeah, as I said, the only caveat being that they will be more revealing than the passive equivalent. That's not to say that our passive models sort of embellish the sound and in strongly. All of the speakers are pretty honest, very neutral. So if he's not locked into owning a large number of power amplifiers, active's definitely the way to go. And with all the benefits it brings to the clarity and the stereo imaging and the dynamics, which is a massive part of classical music, as you say.
Well, this was a great question. One of the viewers from Hong Kong who's had a demo of the SCM50s. I think it was the Actives. I can't remember, but he loved them. He thought that was fantastic. But for him, obviously Hong Kong, with space being at a premium, his question was, what would be the minimum distance apart that he could have a set of SCM50s? I thought that was a really great question.
Well, our usual recommendation for initial setup is that the distance between the speakers should be approximately the same as the distance from one speaker to the listening position. The classic equilateral triangle setup. If you get the speakers too close together in relation to how far you're sitting away, then the stereo image is gonna suffer. You're not going to get that same vivid picture of instruments being on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, and the phantom image in the center. So that would be the only thing to be careful of. But if he can a couple of meters apart, and if his listening position can be a similar distance, then he should still be able to get really good stereo imaging, even if the room's not so large.
So it's not an official, it must be 6 foot or more apart or something like that. It's not really a technical minimum distance, I suppose, is what he's asking.
No, not really. I mean, as long as it needs to be just taken into consideration in relation to the distance you're sitting from the speakers. So you wouldn't want the speakers to be lots closer than the distance from you to the speakers, and you wouldn't want them to be spaced hugely apart compared to your listening distance. So too close together in relation to your distance from the speakers, and the stereo is going to get very confused, or be non-existent. And if they're too far apart compared to your listening distance, then you're going to have a big gap in the middle. So you'll only really have left and right, and you wouldn't have any stereo phantom center image.
Perfect. So as long as you can kind of make it work, then you can make it work really in terms of distances and rooms and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to take it to an extreme, a couple of feet, it might start to suffer, and you could say then that the spacing of the speakers then would really start to detract from what that speaker's capable of, and then having a smaller model, which might give you a bit more flexibility with positioning, might be a better choice. But if we're not talking about them being like 2.5 feet apart, then you should be able to get great results. But just taking into consideration that the spacing should be comparable to your listening distance.
Yeah, so obviously Yong Chen just pretty much asked the exact question what we were just covering there. So hopefully that's answered that, Yong. You'll see you're on a bit of a delay, so hopefully you'll see this answer in a second. I'm going to do my best to just kind of fire through the questions from the live chat. And apologies if I miss anybody. I'm going to do my best for everybody, and obviously to ask you the best questions as well. There was a really nice one. Someone asked the question, they've got SCM40 speakers.
Yeah.
Is it worth them trying to power those SCM40 speakers, from a name Atom, which is like a streaming? Do you know an Atom? It's like a small streaming amplifier.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know it's the all-in-one product. I don't know where it sits in their product range. I mean, essentially for the 40, we'd recommend a minimum of 75 watts per channel, continuous power output. If it falls within that, then you should get good results. I mean, the only caveat to that being if the room was particularly big, then a larger space is going to require more power. So then you might want to up that power to more like 100 to 150 if the room was large. But for a typical domestic space, we would recommend from 75 watts.
I think from memory, I played with the Atom a couple of years ago. I think it's about 40 watts RMS from memory. I might be wrong. So possibly a little bit under ideal and optimum. But you know what? It's got quite a punchy sound. It's got quite a lively, punchy sound. So to me, it'd be one of those things. Try it out. Have a listen. See what you think. See if it works.
At lower and moderate listening levels, it's still going to sound very good. But it's just with more dynamic material that it might start to sort of compress a little bit, especially if you're listening to classical and jazz. You might have recordings with 20 or 30 dB dynamic range, so that's where you really need that amplifier headroom if you're going to correctly reproduce those transients and the music pop and jump out, like I mentioned earlier.
Obviously, Sonat, I can't see his surname, Sonat, I apologise. It said the SCM7 speaker, is that a near-field speaker or is that a mid-field speaker? He's obviously using it near-field, sort of 65 to 70 centimetres. So is that designed as a near-field speaker, really, or can it be used or recommended to be used as a near-field speaker, the SCM7?
No, yeah, you can sit further away from it than that. The only thing to take into consideration is because it's not large and doesn't have a large bass driver. If you're in a big room sitting a long way away, then you might be able to reach sort of the limit of the speaker's capability earlier.
Sorry, Ben, I think the question is the other way around. Can you sit close to it? Can you sit near field?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're fine sitting up close to those. If you've got them like in a desktop situation, they'd work really, really well. And anyone who's using your speakers desktop, I highly recommend there's a couple of stands available now from a few different manufacturers that are about 10 inches tall. Really, really useful. If you've got the speaker sat on a desktop, it'll give it a really thick sort of sound to the lower mid-range, make them sound quite honky. So if you can get them up on these short stands, Koenig and Mayer make a little desk stand, and ISO Acoustics make a little desk stand. That is probably the best upgrade you could make to a setup like that. But yeah, no problem at all listening to them in the near field.
Excellent. So they're not designed only for midfield. I think that was what the question was. They can be used desktop or near field as well. I think that was the question. I had another great question, but it keeps moving around because people keep leaving comments, Ben. So let me change one on me. Where are we? This is it. Could you talk about or describe the phono stage or the phono board? Actually, let me ask the question again. Could you describe the phono board in the CA and SCA preamps, please?
Okay, so the phono stage in the CA2 uses a mixture of discrete and integrated circuits. It's configurable for a range of cartridges, but it doesn't have the same flexibility with loading and gain, and it doesn't have the really low noise performance of the phono stage in the SCA2. So it's not ideal for the lowest output moving coil cartridges. If we look at the SCA2 phono stage, that's designed, cost no object, ultra low noise, happy at 70 dB of gain, and really flexible in terms of its loading options in terms of resistance and capacitance. So if you're looking at exotic cartridges, low output moving coil, the SCA2 is the right solution. If you're looking at moving magnet and medium output MC, then the CA2 phono stage is a good match.
When you're talking vinyl, you're talking a different language, Ben. That you might as well be talking alien to me. Vinyl's not my thing, but never mind. I guess that you're correct. Right, two great questions here. One of them's from Jim Nixon. How you doing, Jim? I know Jim. How you doing? He's asked if in a small room, would the active 19s be better than the active 40s?
Yeah, they could be. In a small space where you're probably going to have the speakers, right close to the wall, you're going to get a lot of low frequency and reinforcement from that wall, from that boundary. So it could be that the SCM40 you end up with too much bass in that scenario. Only caveat to that is that that you're not going to quite have that beautiful mid-range of the three-way design. The SCM19, fantastic as it is, it doesn't have quite the same mid-range as the three-way with the 3-inch mid-range dome. But you could be in the situation where, with its extra bass output close to a wall in a small space, that the bass just swamps the mids. So you don't end up with the benefit anyway. So I know it's difficult at the moment with COVID and no home demos, but if possible, speak to your nearest retailer, see if you can get, after an initial listen at a shop, see if they'll loan you the product to try at home, especially if you know that the space is difficult and you've had problems in the past. But on paper, the 19 is going to be more flexible in terms of where it can be positioned. especially if it's got to go close to a wall.
Well, I would say Jim's possibly going to use Dirac Live, so he'll be able to manage his bass. So Jim, the soft dome mid range in the 40, if it's anything like the 50, would be worth it.
Yeah,
that's all I'll say on that one.
Yeah, in that case, if you've got that facility to have the digital control and be able to attenuate the low frequency a little bit, then 40 would be the way to go for the extra resolution. You go to the three-way design. The designing a mid-bass driver for a two-way is challenging just because of the bandwidth you're trying to get out of it, and also the requirements to reproduce the bass are totally different for those in the mid-range. And you go to the three-way design, and then suddenly you separate out all that hard work that the bass driver has to do from the mid-range driver, and you just get much more openness and resolution from the mids.
Actually, a quick question that's popped into my mind. Is there a big difference, or is there a difference between the soft dome mid-range in the 40 compared to the 50 and the other classic speakers?
Yeah, the 40 uses what we call our standard mid-range. That's the mid-range that's closer to the mid that Billy originally designed back in the late 70s. The diaphragm and voice coil assembly are the same, but the magnet used on the Superdome is much larger and is much higher energy, and uses a special pure iron for the front plate and the pole to enable us to get more energy in the gap. And the result is it's got a more extended high frequency response, so it's easier to cross over to the tweeter, and it's also more efficient than that used in the 40. And the third harmonic distortion is slightly lower as well.
So I suppose in sound quality terms, how close does the 40 get to the 50 in terms of mid-range quality delivery? The active obviously 40 and active 50.
I mean, if you have them two side by side, I mean, you can clearly hear they're from the same family. But when you sort of A/B between the 40 and the 50, I'd say it's similar to the experience I think you had going from the passive 50 to the active 50. You've also considered that the 50 uses a superior bass driver as well, and a superior tweeter. So it's just an improvement in resolution across the full band, including the mid range.
Okay, another question. This is from Christoph Sainen. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He's asked, is pairing the ATC SCA2 with 40A speakers overkill?
I don't think so. I mean, if you weren't using the phono stage, it could be. Are we talking about the passive or the active?
Active 40s. 40
with the actives, okay. Yeah, sorry. No, I don't think so, especially if you're using the phono stage. If you don't need the phono stage, you might not be quite getting the full benefits out of the preamplifier, and in that case, the CA2 would probably suffice.
Okay, couple of really great questions here. One of them's from I can't say his surname. Sorry, Medrad. Hope I've pronounced that correctly. He's asked me to ask you. He's worded, are there any benefits to looking after the speaker drivers in the 50 models? But I don't know if he means the questions. These speakers are out of warranty, so maybe do you have to look after the speaker drivers? Can you look after them? Is there anything you can do to look after the drivers? I think is possibly the question.
No, there's not really any maintenance they need, other than, I mean, the only main precaution to take is just try and keep them out of direct sunlight. The rubber on the bass driver is the thing that will accelerate the aging of the rubber surround on the bass driver the most will be UV light. So try and minimize how much UV light. Put dust covers over them, the grills on when you're not using them, and you could brush the dust off them with a soft brush every now and again. But other than that, they really don't need any maintenance. They'll work fine for many years without any specific care.
Yeah, because I suppose that is one of the things, because the drivers are not metal, so you can't just dust them down with a cloth or something. So a brush, would that be the best advice to getting dust off? Yeah,
totally. Just a brush or a duster. A duster for the bass driver. The mid-range, the coating on that is slightly sticky. So in all honesty, the best thing to do is just leave that alone and make sure the grills are on for as much as possible. The tweeters don't really need much care. If they do get overly dusty, the tweeter, the best way to clean them is with a small, very soft brush, with a paintbrush. Taking a lot of care not to push the dome in.
Great questions coming here. Oh,
definitely do not use a damp cloth on any of the drive units. So
or spray duster. Don't use spray duster either.
yeah, none of that.
A great question's coming from TL. And he's asked, would you consider making higher, or I think he means taller stands for the SCM50 so the tweeters are closer to ear level? So I thought this would be a great time to talk to people about how you set them up and how you angle the stands, because that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, in cases where the stands aren't quite tall enough, the usual thing we do is just, if you do, screw the spikes in at the rear and the spikes out at the front, and then we can angle them back a little bit. We haven't got any plans to change the design of the stand at the moment.
So it's really,
but if you need,
so it's the angle that really brought out the whole front soundstage for me in terms of
yeah. But if they do feel too low, then yeah, tilt them back. So don't screw the spikes out too far, because you need a good couple of turns of a good couple threads engaged for it to be strong and secure. But if you screw the rear spikes all the way in and then the front ones pretty much all the way out, just leaving about 1/4 inch, 6 millimeters of thread still engaged, that will angle the speakers back, and that will raise the acoustic image slightly if he's got a higher than average seating position.
Right, so there's been a few times this kind of question's been asked. It might even be the same person really wants the answer. Is there any reasons why ATC maybe would or wouldn't use digital or Class D amplification in their speakers? Or obviously active speakers or amplifiers, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's two reasons really. I touched upon it earlier when I was talking about the electronics. We put a strong focus on having wide bandwidth in the amplification, be it the preamplifier or the power amplifier. So the tweeter amp especially, it's important that the frequency response of the electronics driving that channel extend well beyond 20 kilohertz, and we run all of our amplifiers out to a minimum of 200k. It's not possible to do that with most switching designs because they have to be low pass filtered to filter out the rubbish they generate at high frequency. So that's why we wouldn't use them on a full range amplifier or for a tweeter amplifier. I mean, they've got their applications where you need high power in a small footprint. They could be really useful for a subwoofer, for instance. But the other reason we don't use them is that we don't have an experience of manufacturing them in-house. We want to make all of our products in-house, and we're not really interested in sourcing OEM modules from someone else. So we haven't gone down the Class D path because we're perfectly happy with the Class A, B and Class G amplifiers we've got. And if there was a strong reason, if there's a strong requirement for a Class D, going with the OEM route makes us feel uncomfortable because, one, it detracts from our made in-house, philosophy, and two, how do we can't give a 6-year warranty on a product that we don't manufacture. So that really summarizes why we're not using Class Ds. I think there's some good Class D amps around now. They're better than they ever have been. But yeah, the main problem for us in terms of the sound quality is that restricted bandwidth, which I think is what gives them their characteristic sound.
Okay,
one of the primary factors that gives them their characteristic sound.
There's a couple of really good questions here next to each other, which makes my life easier. Someone's asked the difference between an S-spec driver and a normal one.
I think that's in relation to the mid-range driver. I touched upon that about 5 minutes ago. So the Superdome, has a larger motor, uses a different steel in the magnet assembly, higher energy in the gap, and that gives it a more extended high frequency response and also higher efficiency. And in the tweeter, it's very similar. So we make a standard tweeter and an S-spec tweeter. The S-spec has got a more powerful motor assembly. It's used in the higher performance products, but also in the more efficient products where that 91.5 dB efficiency is really important. The standard tweeter, which is used in the entry series, it's got a smaller motor assembly. It's not as efficient, but it's also a better match to the smaller, lower efficiency bass drivers and mid-range drivers that it's partnered with.
Another really interesting question. I actually think this might be a difficult one to answer, but I'd like to ask you anyway. If there's a potential customer considering, again, the big boys, the 150s, and they've asked, is there a recommended room size for those obviously larger speakers?
Yeah, the 150s, you'd want to be... I mean, it's very difficult because to make a precise recommendation, because The geometry, the relationship between the length, the width, and the height of the room will impact the sound quality in a certain space. The materials, if it's a stone room, that they're typically going to sound more boomy and less controlled in the bass than a dry lined room or a timber framed property. So it's hard to be precise with this, but I think you want sort of 35 square meters.
Okay.
35, yeah, with sort of 2.4 minimum ceilings. For the 150s to really sound at their best.
Very interesting question here. And I think you might be able to maybe recommend a better speaker. Someone suggested, how would the 50 speaker perform? I haven't said active or passive, but I think they're asking the question, how would it perform if you turned it horizontally so that the mid-range driver's then laying down? But do you not make a speaker that's like that, but already turned over, if that makes sense, with the mid-range driver in the center?
Yeah, we make a pro product which is designed to be orientated horizontally like that, but crucially the tweeter is above the mid-range. So if you've got a speaker in this landscape, sort of aspect ratio, what's still important is that the tweeter is above the mid-range. If the tweeter's to the side of the mid, it will compromise the dispersion pattern of the speaker and the stereo imaging. So on our professional versions of the 50, the 100 and the 150, whereby sometimes there's some challenges in the studios with where they can be put because of the console, other monitoring speakers, all those models have an alternative tweeter position. So if you configure the speaker on its side in landscape, you can take the tweeter out, move it to an alternative position so it's still above the mid-range. But the HiFi 50 that you reviewed should be used in its vertical orientation, maintaining the tweeter above the mid-range. It's not as critical for the mid and bass relationship because that crossover frequency is lower. The wavelengths of sound are longer, and you don't get the same phase issues that you do at the mid to high crossover point.
So really for that particular person, for their use case, they really want the pro product, don't they? Really, because then they can set it how they need it for their room.
Yeah, if they've got to put them on their sides, then the pro model with the tweeter, alternative tweeter position might be the way to go.
Another really interesting question. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this one, but you kind of mentioned a little bit about this earlier. Was someone's asked, would the sound of the SCM50 speakers be improved by using something like ISO Acoustics? I'm going to say Gaia's because they're the ones that I've used a lot underneath the speaker stands. But we could extend that question out to any type of isolation, like the granite slabs, and there's all sorts of tweaks that audiophiles use, don't they, for different things. So is that a known thing to ATC, or is there anything that can be recommended for that?
I think it depends on the floor. If you've got a really resonant suspended wooden floor, any isolation product's likely to give you greater benefits than if you've got a solid stone floor that's much more inert. And the only other thing to be aware of is that a lot of the products sold as isolators, they don't really do the job that they might say they do. To truly isolate you've got a mass spring system. So the isolator is your spring, the mass is the speaker. And to truly isolate the speaker from transmitting vibration into the floor, the resonant frequency of that mass on that spring needs to be well below the audio band. We're talking 7 hertz. So if you bumped the speaker, it would cycle backwards and forwards 7 times a second, which is a really low frequency. A lot of the isolation products, the rubber or the elastomer is too stiff for the mass it's supporting. So they don't necessarily isolate. The ISO Acoustics Gaias are one of the first I've seen which are much, much softer, and I think they've got some shaped sort of ribs and profiles inside them, which again makes them more compliant, which will help the isolation. So some of those products could work, but you just need to be aware that to really do the job properly, it's not always as simple as just putting some bits of rubber underneath the feet of the speakers.
It just popped into my head. Interestingly, someone was asking about raising the height of the speakers up. Well, the guys are going to give you a couple of extra inches, and you can adjust. You'd still be able to get the angle with them. So that could be a double benefit way of raising the speakers a little bit higher if you want to, and still isolating your speakers from the floor and some other benefits from them.
Yeah. And if you needed to put them, if you need really good low isolation down to a low frequency, it may be that you need to increase the mass of the of the speaker and stand on top of it as well. So you maybe look at having the speakers or something on a slab, which then has the isolators underneath. The products that I have seen that do isolate, I think, to a lower frequency are the Townsend product.
Yeah, I was thinking of them when you mentioned springs, actually.
Yeah. So the great thing about those is that they're very soft and very compliant, which means that you can achieve a low frequency, a low resonant frequency of that system, even with a product that's not overly heavy. I mean, if you're happy to build up the mass of whatever it is you've got on top of it, be it a speaker or a turntable, then you can get round the problem. But a lot of the time, especially if it was a turntable you had an isolation problem with, you haven't got enough mass, and the spring that needs to be underneath, whether it's usually if it's a rubber material, you just can't be soft enough. It have to actually be a very soft, compliant spring, and then it wobbles all over the place. So possibly benefits to be had, but it's not necessarily as simple as some of the products out there make out.
Two questions. Sorry, Ben, go on.
And when we talk about isolation as well, I mean, we don't consider spikes really to be an effective isolator. They're good for rigidly coupling and then labeling you to adjust the speaker and ensure it's level, but they don't really isolate if we're talking in terms of vibration from the speaker going into the floor.
So they do a job, but they're not necessarily a benefit in terms of a design.
Yeah, they do. They don't necessarily isolate. If we're talking about vibration from the speaker, eliminating the coupling of vibration from the speaker into the floor, the spikes don't really do that job.
Two really great questions that are related but different. Do ATC speakers pair well with valve amplifiers, and would a valve preamplifier pair well with ATC speakers? I suppose that could be active or passive.
If we're talking about power amplifiers or an integrated, they can do, but our speakers like quite a lot of power. The efficiency is a couple of dB lower than some of our competitors, although they are quite easy to drive in terms of a load. It's usually quite expensive, sort of 75, 100 watt plus valve amplifiers are expensive. If money's no object, then which is fine at this time of year if you live in the northern hemisphere. But if you're, it can be expensive to get something with enough power output. A better approach is probably, and they've also got higher output resistance, so they don't damp and control the bass as well as a solid state. Our preferred route for somebody who really likes valves is to go valve pre, solid state power amplifier, or with an active it'll be a valve pre into the actives, and that can give fantastic results.
Actually, it's not actually a question, it's just something that I've been thinking about, is that let me try and phrase this correctly. So one of the potential objections maybe to an active speaker might be that because it's tied in, it would then be difficult to find what I call like that sweet spot of sound, that sound that you really like, you really enjoy, that's balanced nicely for you. But obviously I've been playing around with a few different DACs and now an ATC preamplifier and a few different bits. And I've actually found it really quite easy to change the sound of the active SCM50s. Not necessarily change it, but the balance, if that makes sense, slightly warmer, slightly more easygoing, or a bit more intense and a bit more up front. So I wanted to just, I suppose, bring up the fact that you can still, I'm going to, in inverted commas, use the word tailor the sound to your preference, even with an active speaker. How do you feel about that, Ben? Is that something that you're mindful of and aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our point of view that the speakers in many people's systems, unless they're using something that's electronics that's quite wacky and out there, in many cases the speakers are probably one of the components in the system that have got the strongest sound signature. So if you suddenly then take something like the SCM50 or any of our speakers really, which are designed with a focus on being quite neutral, suddenly you're going to hear more of what other components are doing. So if you've got a speaker that's got an amplifier combination, got a very strong signature, then if you change the DAC, if you change your turntable, then you're not necessarily going to get the true benefit. You're not going to hear as much of that change upstream. Whereas if you've got a speaker, an active speaker, which is very transparent, very honest, very linear, you're actually going to get more coming through of those changes upstream. So it could be in the case that you actually can you're in a better position to tailor the sound. Okay, you've lost a component that you can change, but you're in a better position to hear really what's going on with the source, with the music you're listening to, the source hardware, the preamplifier, and the DAC if it's digital.
Yeah, that's been very, very interesting for me. And to be honest, there's more questions coming in, but we could be here all night, Ben, and it's just one of those things. So I want to finish on one, I think, really, really interesting question. I'm going to put you on the spot with it. What can you give us news-wise or information-wise that ATC might be coming with that's new and that's exciting and that can get everybody on the edges of their seat?
I mean, I can't really talk about any details of any product developments, other than to assure people that that are looking to invest that we're always working on improvements, upgrades, be it drive units, electronics, new products. So just keep your eyes peeled. But I'm afraid I can't give away any juicy details.
Okay, well, it was worth a try. It's always worth a try. So Ben, I just want to say thank you very much. Obviously for the opportunity of obviously working with ATC and reviewing the kit. That's been really interesting. But thanks for giving me your time coming on this video, coming on the channel. I really appreciate it. I'm sure everybody that's watched this has really appreciated it. You've given us some really interesting and really useful and helpful and great information.
All right, no, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me. I mean, if there's anyone who's just posted questions in the last couple of minutes that haven't been answered, I'll try and keep an eye on those over the next couple of days. And if you can't answer them, Terry, I'll try and get an answer to you so you can post it. I'll comment myself.
Well, unfortunately, the comments will shut down, and unfortunately, you can't then add anything after the event, which is a shame. So, what I'd suggest, if you've got any desperate questions you desperately want to ask Ben after the event, email me, maybe terryellis@pursuitofperfectsystem.com, or Ben, can you give out your email? Is that allowed? Or
there's info@atc.gb.net. So if anyone's got any questions off the back of what we've been talking about, or any questions that you've posted that haven't been answered, then please email info@atc.gb.net. Put in the subject that it's in relation to the YouTube live stream, and I'll get back to you over the next few days.
Excellent, Ben. Look, thanks for doing that. Really, really appreciate it. And email Ben. Don't email me because I've got enough on my plate. So, all right, cool. Right, so
thanks
there we
everyone.
are. Oh, well, thanks, Ben. So, I hope you've really enjoyed this live stream video. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned even more from doing this than I did coming into it. Thank you very much. If you've joined us live, thank you very much. If you've been asking questions, I hope I asked this or got answered as many of them as I can for you. If you are watching the video after the event, thank you to you as well. If you enjoyed these types of live stream interview videos, you'll find other ones that I've done previously in my YouTube channel. There should be a section there called Live. You'll find quite a few there. Plus, there'll be more coming. There's more videos for ATC coming in the future. I'm using them to review some other products as well. So, there's always lots of videos coming, lots of interesting stuff. And, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.